Hi guys, welcome back to the Diet Doc Life Mastery Podcast. I'm Joe Klemczewski with Kori Propst. We're going to talk about immediate gratification today and how that affects our goal pursuit, some of those outcomes. Kori, you know my brain, as soon as I hear that phrase, goes right to the Stanford marshmallow experiment, because I think that's one of the most profound studies ever done, especially because it captures the entire difference of you and me. You are the person who would always win that challenge, and I would be the first person to lose it. So you're going to tell us all about immediate gratification, how to use that, the differences to succeed.
Yeah, well, I think it relates really well to motivation as we're pursuing our goals. And I was having a conversation recently with a fellow clinician and coach, but also who is a client of mine. And he really wanted to talk about motivation. He's, as an entrepreneur, he's focused on a sales process. And when he engages in these, sales calls and conversations with potential clients, the one thing that he says most people say is a main barrier to fulfilling their goal is motivation. Just point blank, motivation. And I asked, what do you think they mean by that? And he's like, I really don't know. That's all they really say. They just say low motivation. And it got me thinking about how motivation is misunderstood by most of us, especially those of us who are pursuing goals, and think what we believe oftentimes is that motivation is feeling like it. In that Stanford marshmallow test, and people can YouTube this, it's all over the place, but they feel like eating the marshmallow immediately because it's, it's tasty, it's sweet, it's yummy. So there's that and evolutionarily, and this is where I think we can, if we understand the mechanism of immediate gratification, we can actually use it to our benefit as we pursue our goals. So motivation is often misunderstood as feeling like it, and it's this, most people perceive it as this driving energy force. And when we set a goal, when we actually decide, I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to sign up to do this 5K or the marathon, we do have a driving energy force. There's a dopamine rush that occurs, and we feel this heightened sense of vitality, and that's awesome. That's not a bad thing at all. But where we go wrong in our thinking is that that's going to be sustained over the long haul as we progress and as we go through the process of all the steps and what we could call minutia as we change our behavior. So immediate gratification. And I did a little video on this on Instagram yesterday because I needed to be able to process it before we actually had this conversation. But we want to feel good as human beings. We want to avoid pain. We want to pursue pleasure. It's awesome when we get that little dopamine rush when we do something that says, ooh, yeah, do that again. That felt really good. That was super awesome. When we eat something or when we get some sort of attention from someone, you name it. The way that we typically, I think about immediate gratification, just like you said when we started the podcast, Joe, though, is that it's a bad thing because it can get in the way of making more positive decisions towards what's important to us, right? And we need to learn how to quell it. We need to learn how to kind of tamp it down. We need to learn some level of self-regulation and self-control in order to make the wiser, more skillful decisions. And that's all true. It is. But from an evolutionary perspective, if immediate gratification is going to be there as a part of us, then why don't we use it to our benefit in a positive way? And I want to let me explain what I mean by that. I cycle for various reasons. The most immediate benefits that I get from waking up in the morning and getting on my bike is a sense of pride, okay? Energy, immediate energy. I am typically learning something new because I have something to focus my attention on, right? And through that process, I'm developing a sense of competence and becoming a better cyclist. And in that process, it's literally becoming part of my identity. Kori is a cyclist. And when we look at what motivation is all about, especially intrinsic motivation, it becomes weaved into our personalities. Cycling gives me a sense of meaning because now I'm attaching it to events with other people and connections that I've made. It helps me to feel an immediate benefit. This is where the immediate gratification piece comes in. Immediately feel a sense of purposefulness, like I'm doing this, and I get value out of that. I get clarity out of waking up in the morning and exercising. I can focus better throughout the day. You know, you've mentioned this in various podcasts that we've done. Even if you're not doing an hour-long workout in the morning, when you get up and you do your 10 minutes of cardio, what are the immediate benefits you experience?
Yeah, it's as you said, it's not a great feeling. I don't want to spend that time. There's nothing gratifying about making those decisions. It's the delayed gratification, even if just 15 minutes later, of what I know is going to happen. So if I could say one thing, I think what you're describing here is completely brilliant in contrasting how most people think of immediate gratification as negative. You don't want that. You want the long-term gain. You want to be the blue chip investor who's making the hard sacrifices now for the long term. But if you realize and recognize the brain just doesn't work that way naturally, you're talking about looking for the immediate gratification that's a contrast.
Correct.
I need to just think one step ahead. Don't think about that long-term arc.
Yep.
Think of what's just that next thing that will give me some level of satisfaction. And then, I mean, what you're talking about really is describing the entire foundation of our upcoming Emerge Strategic Consciousness Tour, because then those things become chemical and neural electrical reactions that just become more repeatable.
Yeah, we're toggling between the outcome and this process right now, this immediate benefit, this gift right here, right now, in the present moment. How do I feel immediately after? How do I feel immediately when, you know, I clip into my pedals? And what am I attaching the clipping sound to? And these are things that we can do very deliberately, like I can ask myself that question. What do I want to connect the clipping sound into my pedals with? Connecting with my best friend, that climbing that mountain, the beautiful mountain in Oregon. Like, and these things, just like you said, Joe, can literally change the neural circuits in our brains so that when we hear the sound, the snap, they conjure the images, the visualizations, the feelings, the emotions of these very positive experiences that immediately are gratifying.
So let me drill down on that for just a second, because I don't want this point to get lost. When you said this is not something you just kind of decide once and it goes away, you got to just think of that next step and that next step and that next step. In that Stanford marshmallow experiment, these children didn't just make one decision. The researcher puts a marshmallow in front of them and says, hey, this is yours if you want it. but I'm going to leave the room for a little bit. And if you save it, I'll come back and I'll give you an extra one.
Yes.
Well, you have to make that decision. Okay, I'm good. And then a second later, and a second later, and a second later, and a minute later, that marshmallow is still sitting there. And you are embedding a win. You're increasing confidence. The further you go, the more you invest in making the better decision. You're strengthening not just that neural circuitry, but even on the emotional side, the limbic system and the neocortex side, you're creating an absolute level of resilience that becomes so much more formidable than if you just really caved every other time.
Absolutely. And the word that comes to mind for me as you're explaining that is just pride. I did this. And what's happening in the moment is we are very consciously and deliberately attuning to something. We are positioning our attention in a certain way in order to create the space for that emotional gift, the immediate emotional gift of pride, of meaningfulness, of purposefulness, of I can do this. Hell yeah, I can do this. Like it's a freaking marshmallow. But just the way in which I'm perceiving the situation, like, oh my God, this is too hard. I'm never going to be able to do this. I want this marshmallow so bad. And as a kid, that it's much different than as, a mature adult who's out of adolescence past the age of 28. Like we don't necessarily have those skills. So the kids who could do that at 8 years old, pretty impressive.
That's why it's the number one predictor of all other areas of their life 50 years later.
Right. Yeah. So yes, part of it is, and I was asked a question, when I got back from my cycling trip a couple weeks ago, how did you manage the pain? And I think this really relates to the same concept. If I were focused on the pain itself, I'm attaching that to other times I've been in pain, times when it's been terrible, times when I've stopped, times when I've given up, times when I perceived the pain as like insurmountable. I can't do this. I am not going to be able to get over this. We learn through practice, through, let's call it neural and attentional conditioning, to view it differently. I was like, okay, there's pain in my knee. Not ideal. Not at all, but what was I going to focus on? How many more miles I had to ride feeling this way? Or was I going to focus on this pedal stroke and then that pedal stroke and the next pedal stroke? Was I going to focus on the form that I was taking on my bike to ensure that it was as best as possible? So getting down to just these pinpoint sort of attentional pieces of focus can remove us from getting swept away by those other sort of thoughts that have the potential to have us give up or make an unwise or unskillful decision.
Well, and that's really, it was your first point, and that's why I wanted to talk about that in the first few minutes, which is I always use the metaphor of the brain being very much like a computer in terms of binaries. You said, don't think of that long arc of intrinsic motivation. Think of using what we think of as negative, which is immediate gratification, to your advantage, to your evolutionary advantage. And what's that? This next thing. It's just how the brain works, and it never goes away. So that person who has lost 50 pounds, but then all of a sudden they've gained 20 back. Well, that first 50 pounds, it wasn't just, oh, it was so easy because I made that decision. You still made great decisions every single day, every minute of the day. But as soon as you turn your attention, as you just described, to the negative, then that becomes your new cycle. And so all you need is that next good decision, just one at a time, just that binary click of that next thing, which can lead to another positive.
Yes.
That's what's so frustrating, I think, Kori, is that people expect that one of these days I'm going to finally get it and I'll have all of the resilience and the grit in the world. I will finally have mastered motivation.
Yeah.
It's just never going to happen.
Well, not unless you have some level of reflection happening as you're going through the process. Like what? Yeah.
I should clarify. You can make it easier because, as you said, of conditioning, but that potential for bad decisions never goes away. It never becomes something you can just take your eye off of.
No, I completely agree. And that's why I think that main point of this is let's use what we perceive as a weakness as a strength. Immediate gratification is not necessarily a bad thing. We can use it to propel our motivation.
Perfect. Awesome.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we'll let it stand right there and
stabilize, sink in. Next time, Joe, maybe we can talk about what gets in the way of high-powered motivation, of being in that attentional space where immediate gratification can be a benefit to us. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
As we described in the podcast, we need that next step. And everybody who likes this kind of topic, and I certainly do, you do want to just keep packing that information that will help. So thank you, Kori. And thank you guys for watching and listening. Make sure you are aware of our other platforms. I'm not sure if you're watching this on YouTube or listening on SoundCloud or Apple, also on our website. So everywhere you go, if you don't mind just dropping us a like or a comment or a review, we like to get those stacked up so people know when they first look at us that, hey, this is legit stuff and it could be helpful. So thank you guys for that as always, and we will catch you next time.
Thanks, guys.